From Holy Trinity Church in Inwood, New York City, welcome to Inwood Art Works On Air. It's where you meet the musicians, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes that make their home what we affectionately call Upstate Manhattan. I'm your host, Aaron Sims, and today we welcome visual artist Jeff Hoppa. Jeff is a New York-based visual artist. His oil paintings on panel and works on paper celebrate the history of exploration, the natural world, and the metaphoric potential of abstraction. His inspirations run the gamut, from rock formations Joshua Tree National Park, where he was an artist in residence in 2007, to the inner ear bones of narwhals at the American Museum of Natural History. We're going to talk to him about his work and so much more, and maybe a narwhal or two. But first, let me welcome you, Jeff, to Inwood Art Works On Air. How are you doing, buddy?
Thanks, Aaron. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for asking.
Thanks
Glad
for
to have
having
you here.
Good to be here.
So I feel artists are asked what their work is about all the time, like nonstop. And I one of my favorite stories, I think it might have been Edward Albee, who said when he was asked what's his work about, he said, about 98 pages or so. And I'm sure you get asked all the time as well. What's the meaning of a certain painting or sketch or something that you've done? And so I'm not going to ask that. However, see, I'm just getting it off right there. However, I think to ask why you do what you do is an honest question. So if you would, for some it's the journey or the love of doing it or storytelling or the exploration of forms or pushing one beyond one's own emotional or perhaps technical limits, or none, or all the above. So I would just like to ask you, sir, why do you pick up your pencil, Mr. Hoppa?
That's a difficult question.
Good.
I think the thing that pops into my head is I can't help it. The director of the graduate school program at School of Visual Arts, where I went back to graduate school after a long post-undergraduate hiatus, once said, "You're only an artist if you have to be. Like, otherwise, choose something that's easier. You know, have a career, make some money, have a family, enjoy your life." But I've been drawing, and it's been something which has been a part of my identity since I was a little kid. So I've always found one way or another to keep that flame alive. There have been times when I've been able to spend more time on it, times when I've been able to spend less time on it. I guess these days it's a continuation of a lifelong pursuit and a lifelong course of study and a lifelong exploration of ideas and forms and media. But more than that, it's a time to be in the studio, and it's a meditative experience to be there, to be making work. I think it pushes your brain into a different zone. So I can be, if I'm lucky enough to have the time to spend 8 hours drawing, when I finish and walk outside, I'm sort of exhausted and elated and marvel at the three-dimensionality of the actual world that's been out there, which I've forgotten. But the time seems to have been only about 20 minutes that I've been drawing. So time collapses in that space, and I think it's restorative. And I'm still interested in spending time that way. And I'm kind of amazed at where the art takes me. I'm not really directing traffic in a conscious way. I'm sort of following along. When I first came to New York, it was to be an illustrator, an editorial illustrator, and I did work for Forbes and The Village Voice and Musician Magazine, these kinds of outlets, and that was more sort of making something to communicate a specific message, and it was a whole different sort of experience, both physically, emotionally. This is something different. This is something I'm not doing to make money, although some in my family might wish I were. I do sell some work, but that's not the goal. The goal is to have that time in the studio and to make that work that brings me something I can't get by doing anything else.
Well, thank you for that wonderful answer.
Rambling and wonderful.
That was
answer.
not difficult at all, by the way. That seemed like well prepared. That could have been a college graduation to the graduate speech. Very, very humble and also very informative. And I agree. I feel the same way. Just to share that, to return the fanfare. It's like, my answer being a lifelong artist is because I must.
Mm-hmm.
That's just what it is. And so I think your professor who said that to you was right on the money.
There you go.
Well, many of your work, your drawings and paintings are abstractions from representational explorations of the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like you to share about what is the prevalent role, how the prevalent role of natural world in your work, and how you find the inspiration in that natural world.
Yeah, so I go down different rabbit holes, and so there's the idea rabbit holes and there's the formal rabbit holes. I think I'm still engaged with and interested in ideas and things that I would have been fascinated by when I was about 12 years old. And I have two sons that are, one's 11 and one's 17 now, so I've been able to relive that with them. But space exploration, Arctic exploration, fossils, Roy Chapman Andrews' history at the Natural History Museum and the history of that institution. All of those things are feed into my exploration. It gives me an excuse to go and study those things, or at least pursue those things on the internet. I used to spend a lot of time at the Natural History Museum. I made a friend in mammalogy, and they would let me go back into the storerooms and dig through the skulls of walruses that were brought back from the Peary expedition to the North Pole, although some would argue he didn't actually get to the North Pole. But they had bullet holes in them. They would shoot the walruses and feed the meat to their dog sled teams. And they had little yellowed tags with the fountain pen writing on them, detailing where that walrus was killed and what was the date and who brought it back. Wow. And just that history is like fascinating. It's like time travel, which is amazing. So I'll do those sorts of things, but then beyond that, there's the formalistic concerns where I take those forms, and I don't want to just do a drawing of a walrus skull with a bullet hole in it and a tag on it. I want to take that form, which somehow speaks to me on another level, on just an aesthetic level, and incorporate that with other forms and overlay it with other forms and create new forms and draw my way through them or paint my way through them. And I think people, when they see my work, bring their experience to it and their ideas about what it might be or what it might mean. If they press me, I will give them a little information. This is this came from this came from that. But often their stories are as interesting or more interesting than my stories. So that's a pleasurable aspect of the work, which comes after the work is done, those conversations with consumers, with art lovers, with folks that are interested enough to stop by and talk to me about it. So that kind of completes the circle, and then I'm back in the studio, exhausted from talking and wanting some time alone to make more work. So it's a nice kind of circle of life.
I would say very circular for sure.
Yeah.
Has the natural world of northern Manhattan found its way into your work?
Yeah, I mean, I love being up here. I first moved to the neighborhood in 1988. I lived on Thayer Street in this crazy, like Barton Fink-like apartment. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And I lived there for a couple of years and explored, Inwood Hill Park and Fort Tryon Park and the cloisters. And the water line, I would take these long walks by the rail tracks, between Dyckman Fields down to the bridge that goes to the Little Red Lighthouse. I still go for runs along that stretch, which you're not supposed to do, but you can.
We'll edit that portion out of the podcast to protect you. Thank
you very much. The glacial potholes, the schist, the uncut forest in Inwood Hill Park. I have a very important family member who's very interested in the parks up here, and so that's been a great introduction. When we first came to the neighborhood, she saw, this is my wife I'm speaking about, she saw the gardens in Fort Tryon Park, and I saw the Cloisters Art Museum. She comes from a gardening family, and I'm an artist, so it seemed like the perfect marriage of our interests, and I've been happy to be up here ever since.
Oh, me too. I'm right there with you.
Yep.
Right there with you. Well, I always feel this podcast has an educational aspect to it, so I wanted to share a quote of yours that I found deep in the annals of the internet, on the interwebs. Quote, "I am trying to accept my limitations. Limitations shape, create the work as much as anything," end quote. Mm-hmm. And I personally feel like the recognition of one's limitations as an empowerment tool
Hmm.
is important for emerging artists to hear. So I want you to share, like in that context, that quote. It's like how you use your limitations, Mr. Wise Man Hoppa.
Uh, uh,
This is
um,
like Confucius tells you about um, visual art here.
First of all, I don't like accepting my limitations. I don't like that I have limitations. The finitude of life is really annoying and an affront almost, because I want to drink life from a fire hose. I'm interested in everything. I want to consume everything and experience everything, but it's just not possible. So you wear yourself out living life that way. When I'm in the studio, it's a little bit of a different experience. For some reason, I think because I came to graduate school after 17 years between undergraduate and graduate school, because I felt like my art was dying on the vine and I needed a full immersion experience. I didn't know where that would lead. I thought maybe from a practical standpoint that I'd become a professor and teach art instead of doing what I was doing to make money. That didn't happen, but I'm so glad I went back, because I got this network of other artists and teachers who I'm still in touch with and who've added immeasurably to the richness of my life. But when I got there, I was a little bit sort of scared. I was terrified. What am I going to do here? I'm an illustrator. I do this kind of work. I'm not sure the fine arts world takes this seriously. And so I immediately kind of pared down. My work became sort of pared down. And I was doing figurative work until that point. I never did another piece of figurative work ever when I got to graduate school. And I did work that started responding to something that was deeper for me, which was the love of the natural world, the love of the shape of stones and of trees and of wood grain and of the water motion, the stars, the lunar landscape, asteroids. All of those things came into the work. But what also came into the work was a realization that, and partly because I admire artists who seem to work within a limited range, I found myself drawn to their work, like Via Selmans, the famous artist who draws like I draw. That if and it just sort of evolved that naturally I began to limit myself, and so I would do a painting and I would use two colors. I would use one brush. Now I do drawings. I use only two. For years, I've done drawings and I've only used two pencils. One is a 2H and one is a 2B. And I use these mechanical pencils and I sharpen the point very assiduously and I draw. And if I get a piece of the drawing done which is 2 or 3 inches square in the course of 4 hours, then I've done what I needed to do. And I know when it's time to leave because I'm exhausted and that's my limit. So I've got to go. But I've limited myself to those two pencils on a particular kind of paper, partly because I think I don't want to. A lot of artists need to explore so many different media and so many different materials. I was at the George O'Keeffe show at the MoMA yesterday with a friend of mine, and they had all of O'Keeffe's materials, and it talked about how she went from watercolor to oil to pastels to charcoal. I don't feel that need so much. I found something that works for me, and I can make the work, I can allow the work to be what it wants to be if I use those materials and stay within that range. But if I start to break out a pot of like fuchsia acrylic paint to try to mix it up and get creative, everything's ruined. So I stay within this narrow band, and time collapses, and when I come out, something has happened on the paper that seems to be right. One of my frustrations in terms of limitations is that because I work the way I do, I don't work quickly. So, for instance, I did a drawing which was a stretch for me, 4 feet by 8 feet, in the same style and using the same two pencils that I used to do all of my work in the last few years. It took me 3 years to finish this drawing, which was intensely frustrating on some level, but if I tried to push to work more quickly or change the rules, I have rules which are self-imposed. I don't erase, I don't smudge, I just use that very, very razor sharp pencil tip to make the drawings. If I changed the rules, the drawing stopped being what it needed to be. The quality disappeared, and the experience of it disappeared. So I have to live within that band, which is something either I made up or I've been given. I'm not sure which, but that's how the work becomes what it needs to be. And so it wasn't so much a conscious decision to accept limitations, but limitations are limitations, right? They're forced upon us. Um, One of my teachers in graduate school said, you need to spend a semester painting with a mop and a bucket of paint. He saw that my impulse was to go tight and to go granular, and he encouraged me to go the other direction. So I ignored his advice completely, and I went even even more in the direction that I was
To quote
naturally
Steve Martin,
tending.
let's
Yeah.
get small.
Right, right. Or to quote someone a meme I saw recently about Tolkien. He was like, could you stop describing that tree? And he's like, I'm going to describe that tree so hard. So maybe I have a contrarian impulse that if someone gives me advice, I'm going to go the other direction sometimes. So it works out in this case. It's
Yeah.
all good. Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for answering that question, because who likes limitations? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Nobody. But you touched on it very eloquently, in the sense that, it becomes like your lanes of where you feel it, and but points like you're comfortable there. Like you sit in that comfort seat, and for whether you like it or not, and maybe it's not living life, as you say, drinking from the fire hose, but you know where you are, and you know what you can do, and you put yourself in place to succeed throughout your. Again, you are the only person you have to answer to.
Yeah.
There's nobody else. You're not. Perfect example you said about your professor pushing you in a different direction with the and if I ever see you with your acrylics, young man, boy, is there going to be hell to pay. But that's I think, again, incredibly helpful, I think, for people to hear, and also wonderful for you to share that, and which is why I think you are so successful. And I've seen that large piece he spent 3 years on, and it's a magnificent piece, and I believe it's on his website as well. So I encourage people to check it out. So we spent a lot of time talking about your work, and again, I really appreciate you being so honest and sharing about the why you do things, and even how you do them. So let's talk about the work you do for other people too.
Okay.
I think I just want to touch on that just a little bit. So in addition to being an artist, you provide uptown artists affordable studio space through Cornerstone Studios, which you put together. It's located in Washington Heights on Bennett Avenue. Can you tell our listeners a bit about it?
Sure. So I was at the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts downtown for about 7.5 years. And when I left there, I had no studio space. That's on 37th Street. So I began to look around this neighborhood. My work and my supplies and my studio materials were stored in a friend's basement during about a 2-year period when I didn't find anything. But then a space opened up at Our Savior's Atonement Lutheran Church at 178 Bennett. And so what I did was I took I'm fairly organized. I work in administration to make money for a financial firm. So I took those skills and I took my knowledge of the model at the Elizabeth Foundation and basically downsized it, and created a proposal for the church council at Our Savior's. And they said, great. And they rented us what's now about 1/3 of the space that we have. Over the years, it's expanded. We started in 2015. We had great support from so many people uptown, from Whittick, which gave us support and became our fiscal sponsor until we became an actual real boy, not-for-profit. So once we had that and the insurance and all the studios in place, and then we sent out a call for entries for the artists, and they showed up. And I think we had maybe 8 artists when we started out in 2015. Now we have, I think, 15 or 16 artists sharing space, an expanded space at the church. We basically rent the 3rd floor of the church and a large room on the 2nd floor of the church. We have open studios twice a year. In the summertime, that's in conjunction with NOMA's Uptown Art Stroll. NOMA's been a great supporter of us. Inwood Art Works has been a great supporter of us. The Miranda family, got to give a shout out. They gave us a grant during COVID to get us through. Who else? Columbia Presbyterian helped us out. The folks at Coogan's helped us out. So we've had so much support from the neighborhood and so much support from the artists who've found working space. Uptown, there's not much space. A lot of artists work in their apartments, which is great, but I've got 2 kids and a wife in a junior 4, and so that's not going to be happening. So I'm so thankful to have a space just down the street stair from where I live on Cabrini, to go and work for 4 or 5 hours and then come home and take care of business with the family. Go back later if I need to. It's open 24/7. We've got some amazing artists there, all the way from Marta Blair to Paul Burble to Dana Hemnes. So many people go to our website, which is cornerstonestudios.nyc. You can check out what's happening. You can sign up for our mailing list. We'll get you plugged in for the open studios. If you're an artist who's looking for space, send us a message. We'll get you on the list of artists who are waiting for space. It's not a first come, first served list. When we have available space, we do a call for entries, and we do what they did when I applied to School of Visual Arts. We just look at the work. We don't look at names, at biographical information, at anything except the work. And then we narrow down our list and go from there. So you could be the last person to add your name to that list and the first person offered space. I'm so thankful to have the space. I'm so thankful, I got to give main thanks for the church for giving us the space.
Yeah.
And for believing in that the arts are an important part of a community, so we're happy to be there, and we've been enjoying using that beautiful space for going on 8 years now.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And it will say this: it is really it's the only artist studio that I know of uptown.
Yeah.
It's the only one, and hopefully there'll be more.
Yeah, absolutely.
But because there are obviously, as people listen to this podcast, there's a lot of them out there who need space,
Mm-hmm.
and what should artists, with no education point too, like what does a studio run from these days?
Cost-wise?
Yeah, how cost-wise?
Yeah.
Because there's sharing opportunities as well as their
Mm-hmm.
own as well. Like just in general, what should people look out for?
Yeah, so some of the rooms are large enough to be shared. Some of them are shared. You can take them individually, or it's kind of a jigsaw puzzle. So what comes available is what's available. But I think we have folks paying from about $300 a month to about just over $1,000 a month. And we charge as little as we can possibly charge because we want to provide affordable space as we can. There are spaces downtown Elizabeth Foundation which are subsidized according to your income, which are, a third, a half, twice as expensive as what we're paying for
Easy.
uptown. So it isn't free because we have to pay our way, but it is it's as cheap as we can make it.
Really cheap.
Yeah.
It's really, and I say again, they have to keep the lights on, folks. So.
Yeah.
And they have a lease they have to honor. So
And I'm sure the church is charging us way below market rate for that space.
Yeah.
So we're thankful there too.
And you've been a great thing for that church too. I have to say that as well.
Yeah.
Really great. And the fact that it's open 24/7, that is so key, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is to be able to do that because some churches won't let you do that. Probably.
And it's a beautiful building.
Yeah.
It makes the space safer for the church, for the folks that live there.
Yep.
The pastor lives one floor below with his family. So there's more eyes and ears in the space. So it's a good thing, win-win, I think.
Very, very much so. And I also want to give Jeff a shout out too. Is not only has he his other community thing he did pre-pandemic, he was the curator in residence at Indian Road Cafe for many years.
Oh yes, that's true.
And so the curatorial world you've also lived in.
Yeah, I did over 50 shows at Indian Road Cafe over a 5-year period, and that was a great experience. Jason, who was the owner then, was a tremendous guy and great to work with. And I noticed that a number of the artists who've appeared on your podcast were artists who I worked with during that period.
Absolutely. Well, again, they're uptown artists, and and you got a creative eye, so you know who's good around here.
Yeah, it was so much fun to meet the neighborhood artists, which is what you're doing here as well, and to give them an opportunity to put their work up. It was just a joy to be able to do that.
It's exactly what we're doing through the podcast here. We're just using this as a platform to bring people to people's work.
You're doing much more than I ever did, Aaron.
Not a competition.
So many different fields.
Not true.
I'm so happy to be invited to be a part of this and to cheer you on as I see what you guys are doing.
And likewise, and I will say this too, just a bit, and it's not anything that you'll ever see on Jeff's resume because he was so kind to be part of one of our group shows we did up here called My Neighbor the Artist.
Oh yeah.
And Jeff was part of a group show of showcasing a work of local artists that I curated throughout, and of all different forms that got to be experienced, and as a purposeful choice to show the great multicultural talent, texturally and otherwise.
Well, there's so much going on up here. Do you remember an artist named Bokov? Were you around then?
I do remember this, like 2003 or so.
Bokov was I think he was maybe homeless. He was a Russian artist, and he would make these amazing artists out of found pieces of driftwood or old pieces of tin, where he would draw or paint on rocks, and he would leave a free artwork on a stump near where we live in Fort Tryon Park every morning. And if you
Wow.
got there early enough, sometimes I just photographed it, but sometimes I took it home because they were there for the taking.
That's so
There's
cool.
still a couple of his works on the street stair at the end of Pinehurst going down to 181,
Okay.
like hung on a fence. And I think they made a documentary about him, and my wife
wow.
and oldest son may appear in that film. But there's so much going up from that to what we're doing now.
Yeah.
The art scene has grown exponentially
Yeah.
in the neighborhood. But there's always something interesting happening if you just peek around the corner.
Yeah. Also, this Howard Better right now has, if you see the tin cans
Yep.
anywhere on mostly abandoned storefront buildings or
Mhm.
perhaps some chain link fences here and there, you'll see Howard Better's work, which made me think of it from what
He
you
was
said.
always at Indian Road Cafe as well.
Yes.
So yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, really
fun.
great stuff. Jeff, you are a big reason why the art has blossomed up here in Inwood and Washington Heights, and we thank you for that. And before we say goodbye, where can we go to send people to know more about you and your work?
Easy enough. JeffHoppa.com is my website. I'm on Instagram and all that as well, but there are links from the website to that. And for Cornerstone, it's cornerstonestudios.nyc.
Excellent. Listeners will put those descriptions in of the links into the descriptions of this episode. So take your marching orders and go check them out. Okay. Well, thanks again, Jeff, for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
So once again, folks, this is Inwood Art Works On Air. It's a platform for local artists, and we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes that make their home here in northern Manhattan. If you have any time at all right now, go to Apple Podcasts and show us some love and rate and review this podcast. That really does help us. Many thanks.
5 stars.
Whatever you can do. Many thanks here to Holy Trinity Church for hosting us here in Inwood, and also to heightsites.com for what they do for us to promote the show here. If you want to support us and all that we do here at Inwood Art Works, whether it's the film festival, alfresco films outside, live performances, pop-up galleries, whatever we do, you can do so at inwoodartworks.nyc/donate or via Venmo at Inwood Artworks. Be sure to follow us on social media, keep all that we do. And also, I'm going to say is Inwood Art Works is very proud to be supported by public funds, New York State Department of Cultural Affairs, and a partnership with the City Council. And Inwood Art Works programming is made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. From the top of Manhattan and the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims for Inwood Art Works On Air.